Some curses are meant to kill slowly, savoring every moment of despair. The scream that tore through the obsidian walls of Shadow Moon Castle at precisely 3 in the morning was not human. It was something far more primal, far more broken, the death cry of a king whose very blood had turned to poison. Lyra Ashwood jerked awake on her straw pallet in the servants' quarters, her unusual silver eyes snapping open in the darkness. Around her, the other castle staff stirred restlessly, but none dared acknowledge what they'd all heard. The Alpha King was dying, and with each passing night, his agony grew worse. Another nightmare, she thought, pulling her threadbare blanket closer. But even as she tried to convince herself it was just a dream, the acrid smell of burning silver drifted through the stone corridors. The curse was feeding again. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the most powerful werewolf in the 7 territories had been reduced to a shadow of his former self. 6 months since the great Cassius Blackthorne, Alpha King of the Shadow Moon Pack, had begun his slow descent into madness and death. Lyra had scrubbed the blood from his throne room floors. She'd seen the silver veins that now spiderwebbed across his once perfect skin like deadly lightning frozen in time. She'd watched the strongest wolves from across the realm kneel before him in failure, their heads bowed in defeat after attempting to break what everyone now called the unbreakable curse. She was nobody. Less than nobody. A defective Omega who couldn't even shift into her wolf form, spending her days on her hands and knees, cleaning up after her betters. What could she possibly know about saving kings? The morning bell tolled through the castle, and Lyra forced herself to rise. Her joints protested, 17 years old, and she already felt ancient from the backbreaking work. She dressed quickly in her servant's gray uniform, the rough fabric scratching against skin that never seemed to tan properly, always maintaining that odd, almost luminescent paleness that marked her as different. In the servants' hall, the usual whispers followed her like smoke. There goes Ghost Girl. Still can't believe she's even Omega. More like a broken human. Those eyes ain't natural. Silver like that, it's witchcraft. Lyra kept her head down, collected her cleaning supplies, and made her way toward the upper levels. She had work to do, and gossip wouldn't scrub bloodstains from marble floors. The throne room of Shadow Moon Castle was a monument to power and darkness. Carved from single blocks of obsidian, the walls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Massive pillars twisted toward a vaulted ceiling painted with the phases of the moon, a reminder that even kings were subject to the lunar cycles that governed their kind. But today, something was different. As Lyra pushed open the heavy doors, she found herself face to face with Marcus Steele, the king's beta and right hand. Where Cassius was all dark elegance and barely contained power, Marcus was brutally efficient, sandy hair kept military short, hazel eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that never quite reached those eyes. Perfect timing, little mouse, Marcus said, his voice carrying the subtle authority that made even alphas step carefully around him. His Majesty requires assistance. Behind Marcus, scattered throughout the throne room, stood the latest collection of hopefuls. Lyra recognized some faces: Elder Thorn from the Northern Territories, his gnarled hands still glowing faintly from whatever ritual he'd just attempted. Lady Seraphina Nightshade, her midnight hair perfect despite the early hour, her red lips pressed into a tight line of frustration. Master Aldrich the Bone Reader, whose reputation for communing with the dead had traveled from across the eastern seas. All of them had failed. And at the center of it all, slouched in his throne like a broken god, sat King Cassius Blackthorne. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen him from a distance, of course, but never this close. Never when he was aware. Even cursed, even dying, he was magnificent. 6.5 feet of lean muscle and predatory grace, dark hair that looked like it had been touched by midnight itself, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray shot through with silver that seemed to see everything and forgive nothing. But it was the curse's mark that made her stomach clench with sympathy. Silver veins traced patterns across his skin like a living tattoo of death. They pulsed faintly, as if his very blood had turned to liquid metal. The veins were thickest around his heart, spreading outward like a spider's web of destruction. Where they ran closest to the surface, his skin had taken on a metallic sheen that caught the torchlight and threw it back in harsh, unforgiving angles. His head lifted as the assembled healers and mystics began to file out, their defeat written in every line of their bodies. Those storm-gray eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment, Lyra forgot how to breathe. There was intelligence in that gaze. Pain, yes, and a rage that could level mountains, but underneath it all, a sharp awareness that cut through her like a blade. This wasn't a man lost to madness. This was a predator analyzing every person in his territory, measuring their worth, their threat level, their usefulness. When those eyes fell on her, she felt weighed and measured in the span of a heartbeat. "The servants will clean up your mess," Marcus announced to the departing mystics, his tone making it clear this was a dismissal, not a request. "Perhaps next time you won't be quite so enthusiastic, with the pig's blood and graveyard dirt." Lady Seraphina paused at the doorway, her violet eyes flicking to the king with undisguised hunger. "Cassius," she purred, "you know my offer stands. A mate bond could transfer the curse to you." The king's voice was rough, like gravel over silk, but it carried easily through the vast room. How noble. How utterly pointless. The lady's perfect composure cracked slightly. "The curse feeds on isolation, on despair. If you would just... If I would just what, Seraphina? Condemn another soul to this?" He gestured to his silver-veined arms with bitter humor. "I've killed one mate already. I won't make it two." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several of the departing mystics exchanged glances, and Lyra saw Lady Seraphina's face go pale beneath her careful cosmetics. "Isabella's death wasn't your fault," Marcus said quietly, but his words carried a warning edge. "The enemy packs." Enough. The single word from Cassius contained such absolute authority that even his beta fell silent. "Leave me. All of you." As the throne room emptied, Lyra found herself frozen in place, bucket and brush in hand, unsure whether she should flee with the others or begin her work. The decision was made for her when Marcus's hand clamped down on her shoulder. "Not you, little mouse. His Majesty has had another episode. The floors will need attention." Lyra looked down and saw what Marcus meant. Dark stains spread across the polished obsidian, blood mixed with something that glittered like crushed diamonds. Where the king's curse-tainted blood had fallen, the stone itself seemed to be corroding. She nodded and moved toward the mess, acutely aware that she was now alone with the two most powerful men in the kingdom. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft scrape of her brush against stone and the barely audible sound of the king's labored breathing. "You're new to the upper levels," Cassius said suddenly, and Lyra's hand stilled on her brush. "No, Your Majesty," she replied quietly, not looking up. "I've been cleaning your rooms for 3 years." A pause. Then, impossibly, she heard the hint of dark amusement in his voice. "Have you? And here I thought I'd have noticed someone with silver eyes living in my castle." This time she did look up, and immediately regretted it. He was leaning forward slightly in his throne, studying her with the focused intensity of a hunter who'd spotted something unexpected. The silver veins along his neck pulsed brighter, as if responding to some internal surge of emotion. "They're just pale blue, Your Majesty," she lied smoothly. "The light plays tricks." "Does it?" He rose from his throne with fluid grace that belied his condition, and Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. Even dying, even cursed, Cassius Blackthorne commanded every inch of space around him. "Marcus, what do you think? Blue eyes or silver?" The beta's attention sharpened on Lyra with uncomfortable intensity. "Silver," he said after a moment. "Definitely silver." "How interesting." Lyra kept scrubbing, though her hands had begun to tremble slightly. She'd spent years being invisible, and she preferred it that way. Attention from people like Marcus Steele rarely ended well for servants. "Look at me," Cassius commanded, and despite herself, Lyra's head snapped up. The alpha voice was impossible to resist, even for someone like her who barely registered on the pack hierarchy. He was close now, close enough that she could see the way the silver veins pulsed beneath his skin, close enough to catch his scent, pine and storm winds and something darker, something that made her wolf sense prickle with unease. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now but no less commanding. Lyra, your majesty. Lyra Ashwood. Ashwood. He repeated the name like he was tasting it. I knew an Ashwood once. Brilliant fighter. Died in the Southern Campaign 15 years ago. My father, your majesty. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Something shifted in those storm-gray eyes. Thomas Ashwood's daughter. Then you have warrior blood in you, despite. He gestured vaguely at her small frame, her obvious Omega status. I'm nothing like my father, your majesty. No, Cassius agreed, circling her slowly like a predator studying prey. He could shift. The casual cruelty of the words hit her like a physical blow, but Lyra kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse, much worse, from people far less important than the Alpha King. I don't need pity, your majesty. Good, he said, stopping directly in front of her. I don't have any to spare. As he spoke, a tremor ran through him, and Lyra watched in horrified fascination as the silver veins along his arms flared brighter. His jaw clenched, and she could see the tremendous effort it took for him to remain standing. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Lyra reached out and touched his hand. The effect was immediate and impossible. The moment her skin made contact with his, the silver veins under his skin faded. Not completely, but noticeably, as if someone had turned down their intensity like dimming a lamp. For just a heartbeat, maybe two, the cursed patterns lightened to a barely visible tracery against his skin. Cassius went perfectly still. Marcus cursed softly and stepped closer. And Lyra stared at her own hand in shock, because for those few seconds, she could have sworn she felt something stir inside her, something that felt almost like the wolf she'd never been able to find. What did you just do? Marcus demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. Lyra snatched her hand back, stumbling backward until her shoulders hit the wall. I don't know. I didn't do anything, I just... The veins faded, Cassius said quietly, examining his own hand with the fascination of a scientist studying a new specimen. For a moment, they actually faded. Impossible, Marcus said flatly. The curse can't be. He stopped talking as Cassius raised one hand for silence, his attention focused entirely on Lyra. She felt pinned by that gray gaze, like a butterfly mounted on a collector's board. Do it again, the king commanded. Your Majesty, I don't think, Marcus began, but Cassius cut him off with a look. I said, do it again. Lyra's mouth went dry. I don't know what I did the first time. Touch me again. The simple words sent heat flooding through her cheeks, because in that moment, they sounded less like a royal command and more like something else entirely. Something that made her very aware of how alone they were, how tall and powerful he looked even marked by his curse, how those storm-gray eyes seemed to see straight through her. She reached out again, more slowly this time, her fingertips barely brushing against the back of his hand. Nothing happened. Try again, he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice now. Press harder. This time she flattened her palm against his hand, skin to skin, and held it there. For a long moment, nothing. Then, just as she was about to pull away in embarrassment, she felt it again, that strange stirring inside her chest, like something waking up after a very long sleep. The silver veins along Cassius's arm dimmed, the metallic sheen fading from his skin until he looked almost normal. Almost healthy. Impossible, Marcus breathed, but his voice held a note of something that might have been fear. Lyra jerked her hand back, and immediately the silver veins flared back to their full, deadly intensity. Cassius made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, but close. How? He asked, and for the first time since she'd known of his existence, the Alpha King sounded uncertain. I don't know, Lyra whispered, staring at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. I don't know what's happening to me. Marcus stepped forward, and there was something in his expression that made every instinct Lyra possessed scream danger. His hand closed around her upper arm in a grip just shy of painful. I think, he said carefully, that we need to have a very long conversation, little mouse. As he began to drag her toward the door, Lyra looked back over her shoulder at the king. Cassius was still staring at his own hand, flexing his fingers like he was testing to make sure they still worked. "I know who really killed Queen Isabella," she whispered. Marcus's grip on her arm tightened to the point of pain, and his steps faltered. Behind them, she heard the scrape of boots on stone as Cassius Blackthorne, Alpha King of the Shadow Moon Pack, rose from his throne. "What did you say?" His voice was deadly quiet. Lyra met Marcus's eyes, saw the flash of something wild and dangerous there, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd just signed her own death warrant. But sometimes, when you had nothing left to lose, the truth was the only weapon you had. "I said," she repeated more clearly, "I know who really killed Queen Isabella." The last thing she saw before Marcus hauled her from the throne room was the king's face transforming from curiosity to something far more terrifying: hope. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 2. The weakest link often holds the strongest truth. The tower room was a cage dressed up as luxury. Lyra sat on the edge of an ornate bed that probably cost more than her father's annual salary had been, staring out through iron bars at the kingdom spread below. The Shadow Moon territory stretched to the horizon, dark forests and moonlit valleys that had once seemed infinite in their beauty. Now they looked like a chessboard where she'd just made a move that would either save the king or destroy them all. The heavy door groaned open, and Marcus Steele entered with the predatory grace of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with violence. He'd changed from his formal beta attire into simple black clothing, but somehow that made him more dangerous, not less. Without the trappings of court ceremony, he looked exactly like what he was, a killer. "Comfortable?" he asked, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed like a death knell. "I've slept in worse places." Lyra kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Though usually by choice." Marcus smiled, and it was the kind of expression that never reached the eyes. "You have excellent composure for a servant who just accused the king's beta of regicide." "I didn't accuse you of anything. I simply stated a fact." "Did you?" He moved to the window, standing close enough that she could smell the subtle scent of violence that clung to him, metal and leather and something darker. "Tell me, little mouse, what exactly do you think you saw?" For a moment, Lyra was back in Queen Isabella's chambers 3 years ago, 17 years old and trembling as she arranged fresh roses in the crystal vase that had been the queen's favorite. Isabella had been so kind to her, one of the few people in the castle who treated her like a person instead of a broken omega to be pitted or ignored. "I saw you argue with her," Lyra said quietly. "The night she died." Marcus went very still. Many people argued with Queen Isabella. She had strong opinions. Not like that. The memory rose unbidden, Marcus's voice raised in desperate anger, Isabella's calm refusal, the sound of something breaking. "You told her you loved her. You begged her to leave the king, to run away with you. Careful, girl. You're walking into territory that could get you killed." But Lyra had spent 3 years carrying this secret like a stone in her chest, and now that the words had started, they wouldn't stop. "She laughed at you. Not cruelly, but sadly. She said she could never love anyone the way she loved Cassius, and that you were too good a friend to throw your life away on impossible dreams." Marcus's hands had begun to shake, just slightly. "You're lying." You grabbed her shoulders. You shook her. You said, Lyra's voice cracked slightly. You said if you couldn't have her, then no one could. The silence stretched between them like a blade waiting to fall. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "And then what happened?" "I ran." The shame of it still burned in her chest. "I was scared and stupid and 17, and I ran back to the servants' quarters and hid under my blankets like a child. But I heard the scream 20 minutes later. I heard when they found her body. Yet you said nothing. For 3 years, you said nothing while the kingdom burned and enemy packs were blamed for your queen's death. Who would have believed me?" Lyra stood from the bed, sudden anger flaring in her chest. "I was nobody then, and I'm nobody now. A broken omega with delusions of grandeur, that's what they would have called me. They would have called me a liar or had me executed for speaking against the king's beta. They still might. Yes, she agreed quietly. They still might. But the king is dying, and if there's even a chance that my death could save his life, then it's worth the risk. Something flickered across Marcus's face, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. You'd die for a man you barely know? I'd die to save an innocent man from paying for crimes he didn't commit. Lyra met his gaze steadily. Cassius Blackthorne has many sins on his conscience, but Isabella's murder isn't one of them. The guilt is eating him alive almost as much as the curse. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her with the intensity of a man trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A terrified servant girl who could be bullied into silence. His smile was sharp as a blade. Instead, I find someone with enough backbone to stare down the second most powerful man in the kingdom and call him a murderer to his face. Are you going to kill me? Probably. Marcus moved away from the window, beginning to pace the small room like a caged wolf. Though I admit, I'm curious about something else first. What? How you managed to affect the king's curse. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. That little trick with your hands, that was real, wasn't it? Lyra's throat went dry. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me. I saw the silver veins fade when you touched him. I saw his pain ease for the first time in 6 months. Marcus reached out and caught her chin in his hand, tilting her face toward the lamplight. And I see those eyes of yours, silver as moonlight on water. So tell me, little mouse, what are you? I'm nobody, she whispered. No. His grip tightened slightly. Nobody doesn't make ancient curses falter with a touch. Nobody doesn't have eyes like liquid silver and skin that never quite looks human. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. What are you really? Before Lyra could answer, the door burst open with enough force to rattle the hinges. Cassius Blackthorne filled the doorway, and the sight of him made her heart stutter in her chest. He'd changed clothes since the throne room, gone were the formal robes of kingship, replaced by simple dark pants and a white shirt that did nothing to hide the silver veins now crawling up his neck like deadly ivy. His storm-gray eyes were bright with fever and something that might have been desperation. Marcus, he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made mountains bow. Step away from her. The beta's hand fell from Lyra's face, but he didn't move back. Cassius. I wasn't expecting you. I'm sure you weren't. The king stepped into the room, and immediately the space felt smaller, more charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. We need to talk. About what? About why you've imprisoned the one person who might be able to save my life. Marcus's laugh was bitter. Save your life? She's accused me of murdering Isabella. She's either delusional or dangerous, possibly both. Then let me hear what she has to say. Cassius moved to stand between Marcus and Lyra, and she caught his scent again, pine and storm winds and something wild that made her pulse quicken. If she's lying, we'll know. If she's not. If she's not, then you'll have me executed for treason, and the kingdom will fall apart without its beta. Marcus's voice carried an edge of something that might have been fear. Is that really what you want? What I want, Cassius said softly, is the truth. I've been carrying the guilt of Isabella's death for 3 years, Marcus. If there's even a chance that I didn't fail to protect her. The pain in his voice made Lyra's chest ache. She stepped forward before she could think better of it, placing herself partially between the 2 most dangerous men she'd ever met. You didn't fail her, she said quietly. She loved you completely. She told me once that loving you was like loving the storm itself, wild and beautiful and absolutely essential to who she was. Cassius went very still. She said that? The week before she died. I was helping her with correspondence, and she was writing to her sister in the Eastern Territories. She said. Lyra's voice softened with memory. She said that she'd found her other half, and that even if she only had one lifetime with you, it would be enough to last through eternity. The silver veins along Cassius's neck pulsed brighter, and for a moment his expression was raw with old grief. She wrote about me to her sister? Every week. Always about how proud she was to be your queen, how much she admired your dedication to the kingdom, how she hoped to give you children who would inherit your strength and her stubbornness. Lyra smiled sadly. She was planning to tell you about the pregnancy the night she died. The words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of shock that seemed to reverberate off the walls. Cassius stumbled back a step as if he'd been physically struck. Pregnant? The word was barely a whisper. 2 months along. She'd just had it confirmed by the court physician that afternoon. Lyra's heart broke for the man standing before her, watching his world reshape itself around this new knowledge. She was so happy, Cassius. She was practically glowing with it. Marcus cursed softly under his breath, and when Lyra looked at him, his face had gone pale. You never mentioned. Because you never asked about her plans for the future, Lyra snapped, sudden anger flaring bright and hot in her chest. You were too busy trying to convince her to abandon her husband and her crown and her duty to think about what she might actually want. She was wasted on him, Marcus snarled back. A king who cared more about his borders than his wife, who left her alone for months at a time while he played war. A king who loved her so completely that he spent 3 years dying of guilt over her death, Lyra shot back. A king who's never looked at another woman since she died, despite having dozens of suitable mates throwing themselves at his feet. Enough. Cassius's voice cut through their argument like a blade, quiet but absolute in its authority. He was staring at Marcus now with an expression Lyra couldn't read. Is it true? Which part? Marcus asked, but there was something hollow in his voice now, something defeated. Any of it. All of it. Cassius took a step closer to his beta, his oldest friend, the man he'd trusted with his life 1,000 times. Did you kill my wife? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I loved her. That's not what I asked. I loved her, Marcus repeated, louder this time, and there was anguish in his voice that made Lyra's heart clench with unexpected sympathy. I loved her from the moment I first saw her, years before she met you. But she never looked at me as anything more than a friend, a trusted advisor, someone safe and reliable and utterly forgettable. Cassius's hands had begun to shake. Marcus. And then you came along with your storms and your passion and your absolute certainty about everything, and she looked at you like you hung the moon. Marcus's laugh was broken, bitter. Do you know what it's like to watch the person you love fall for someone else? To stand by their side at their wedding and smile and pretend to be happy while your heart dies in your chest? Did you kill her? Cassius asked again, and this time his voice carried the alpha command that could compel truth from even the strongest-willed wolf. Yes. The word fell from Marcus's lips like blood from a wound. God forgive me, yes. The admission hung in the air between them, terrible and final. Cassius made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a sob. It wasn't supposed to happen, Marcus continued, the words pouring out of him now like water through a broken dam. I just wanted to talk to her, to make her understand what she was throwing away. But she was so stubborn, so absolutely certain that she belonged with you. So you killed her. I lost my temper. I grabbed her, and she fought back, and... Marcus's voice broke. It was an accident. A moment of rage and grief and stupidity, and then she was just gone. Lyra watched the two men, once friends, once brothers in everything but blood, stare at each other across an unbridgeable chasm of betrayal. The pain in the room was so thick she could taste it. And the war? Cassius asked quietly. The attacks from the Eastern Pax? I needed someone to blame. Marcus straightened his shoulders, meeting his king's gaze with something like defiance. I fed information to the Ravenclaw pack, made it look like they were responsible. Started rumors about Isabella discovering their war plans. You betrayed our allies. You condemned innocent wolves to death. I condemned enemies of the crown to death, Marcus corrected. The Ravenclaw pack had been looking for an excuse to challenge your authority for years. I simply gave them what they wanted. The sound Cassius made this time was definitely a growl, low and dangerous and filled with 3 years' worth of misdirected rage finally finding its proper target. But before he could move, before he could shift into the massive black wolf that was his other form and tear his beta's throat out, Lyra stepped between them. "Wait," she said quietly. Both men looked at her in surprise, as if they'd forgotten she was there. "There's something else you need to know," she continued, looking directly at Cassius. "About what I am, and why I can affect your curse." "What are you talking about?" Cassius demanded. Lyra took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. "I'm not an Omega. I never was." "That's impossible," Marcus said flatly. "You can't shift. You have no pack status, no territorial instincts." "Because I'm something else entirely." Lyra met Cassius's storm-gray eyes, seeing the confusion and desperate hope warring in their depths. "I'm a silver wolf." The words fell into stunned silence. Marcus actually laughed, short and disbelieving. "Silver wolves are extinct. They died out centuries ago." "Most of them did," Lyra agreed. "But not all. My mother was the last of her line, and she hid among the common wolves to protect herself and her bloodline. She mated with my father, had me, and died giving birth because her body wasn't meant to carry a half-blood child." Cassius was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Silver wolves were said to be the most powerful of our kind." They were. But their power was so great that it required balance, a blood bond with an Alpha King to awaken and control it. Lyra held up her hands, studying her own pale skin as if seeing it for the first time. "Without that bond, the power stays dormant. I can't shift because my wolf is too strong for my human body to contain." "The silver veins," Cassius said slowly. "Your eyes, your skin. The silver in my bloodline matches the silver in your curse. That's why my touch affects it. I'm not fighting the curse, I'm harmonizing with it." Lyra looked between the two men, both of whom were staring at her like she'd just announced she could fly. "I think I might be able to break it completely, but only if..." "If what?" Cassius demanded. "If we form a blood bond. A true mating bond between a silver wolf and an Alpha King." Her cheeks flushed hot with embarrassment, but she forced herself to continue. "The ancient texts say it was the most powerful magical alliance our kind ever knew." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. A mating bond wasn't just political or magical, it was deeply, intimately personal. It would tie their souls together, make them able to share thoughts and emotions, create a connection that death itself couldn't break. "Even if that's true," Marcus said, his voice tight with something that might have been jealousy, "it's too dangerous. If the bond fails, if you're wrong about what you are, it could kill you both. And if we do nothing, the curse will kill Cassius anyway," Lyra pointed out. "At least this way, we have a chance." Before anyone could respond, a servant appeared in the doorway, his face pale with panic. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "Forgive the intrusion, but dinner is served, and the cook wanted me to tell you that she prepared your favorite." "Not now," Cassius said sharply. "But Your Majesty, you haven't eaten in 2 days, and Master Marcus specifically requested." The servant's words died as both Cassius and Lyra turned to stare at Marcus with sudden, terrible understanding. "You requested a specific menu?" Cassius asked quietly. Marcus's face had gone completely blank, but Lyra could see the calculation in his eyes, the moment when he realized he'd been caught. "It's your birthday," he said simply. "I thought you should have something you enjoyed." "My birthday was last month." "Then I was being considerate." The lie fell flat between them. Cassius moved toward the door with sudden purpose, but Marcus was faster. He grabbed the king's arm, his fingers digging into the silver veined skin hard enough to leave bruises. "Don't," Marcus said urgently. "Cassius, please. It's the only way." "The only way to what?" But even as Cassius asked the question, Lyra could see him beginning to understand. The curse was getting worse, spreading faster, the silver veins now climbing toward his heart with deadly purpose. To end this quickly. To spare you the agony of a slow death. Marcus's voice was soft, almost gentle. It's already in the wine. A few sips, and the curse will burn through you like wildfire. You'll be gone in minutes instead of months. You poisoned me. There was wonder in Cassius's voice, as if he couldn't quite believe the scope of the betrayal. I gave you mercy. Cassius pulled free from his beta's grip and headed for the door, but he'd only made it halfway down the corridor before the poison, whatever Marcus had used to accelerate the curse, hit his system like liquid fire. He collapsed against the stone wall, his breathing harsh and labored, silver veins flaring so bright they were visible through his shirt. The curse was racing toward his heart now, no longer content to kill slowly. Lyra didn't think. She didn't weigh consequences or consider the risks. She simply ran to him, dropping to her knees beside his crumpled form and pressing both hands against his chest. Hold on, she whispered. Please, just hold on. The moment her skin touched his, power exploded between them like a star being born. Silver light erupted from their joined hands, so bright it turned the dark corridor into noonday light. The castle foundations groaned and shook as something ancient and powerful stirred to life in Lyra's chest, her dormant wolf, finally awakening after 17 years of sleep. But this wasn't the gentle awakening she'd imagined. This was raw, primal power unleashed all at once, and it felt like being struck by lightning from the inside out. Through the connection of their joined hands, she felt Cassius's wolf rise to meet hers, a massive, dominant presence that was all storm and shadow and barely controlled violence. Their wolves circled each other in the space between their souls, testing, measuring, deciding. And then, impossible as it seemed, they began to bond. The castle shook harder, stones grinding against stones as the power of two legendary bloodlines merged for the first time in 3 centuries. Somewhere in the distance, Lyra heard Marcus shouting, heard servants screaming, heard the ancient walls of Shadow Moon Castle protesting the supernatural forces being unleashed within them. But all of that seemed distant and unimportant compared to the connection forming between her and the man whose life she was trying to save. She could feel his thoughts now, his emotions, the terrible guilt and rage and loneliness he'd carried for 3 years. And underneath it all, growing stronger by the second, she felt something else, something that made her heart stutter and her breath catch. He was falling in love with her. Not because of magic or convenience or desperation, but because in the space of a single conversation, she'd shown him more understanding and compassion than he'd felt in years. Because she'd seen him at his worst, cursed and dying and consumed with guilt, and had chosen to save him anyway. The realization hit her just as the silver light began to fade, leaving them both gasping and shaking on the cold stone floor. Lyra, Cassius whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion and wonder. She looked down at him, at the man whose head was pillowed in her lap, whose storm-gray eyes now held flecks of silver that matched her own. The curse was gone. Completely, utterly gone, as if it had never existed. His skin was clear of silver veins, his breathing steady, his color healthy and strong. But something had taken its place, a bond between them that thrummed with power and possibility and a connection so deep it made her dizzy. What did we just do? She asked. Before he could answer, the castle shook again, and this time the tremor felt different. Not magical, but physical. As if something very large was moving beneath the foundations. In the distance, she heard the sound of howling, not from the castle's inhabitants, but from something else. Something old and angry and very, very hungry. Her dormant wolf had finally awakened. And apparently, it had woken up other things as well. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 3. Some bonds are forged in silver and sealed in fire. The sound of shattering glass echoed through Shadow Moon Castle like a symphony of destruction. Every window in the east wing exploded outward in a shower of crystalline fragments, and in the distance, Lyra could hear the howls of confusion and terror from wolves throughout the kingdom who had felt the shockwave of her awakening ripple through their souls like wildfire. She sat on the floor of the corridor where she'd collapsed, Cassius's head still cradled in her lap, both of them staring at each other in wonder and growing alarm. The silver light that had erupted from their joined hands was gone, but the power still thrummed between them like a living thing, wild, untamed, and growing stronger by the moment. "What's happening to me?" Lyra whispered, her voice shaking as she felt something enormous stirring in the depths of her consciousness. Her wolf, dormant for 17 years, was finally awake, and it was angry. Cassius pushed himself upright with careful movements, his storm-gray eyes never leaving her face. The curse was completely gone, she realized with a jolt of relief. His skin was clear and healthy, the silver veins that had been slowly killing him erased as if they'd never existed. But there was something new in his gaze now, a flicker of silver that matched her own eyes, a sign of the bond forming between them. "You're coming into your full power," he said quietly, reaching up to touch her cheek with gentle fingers. "But it's happening too fast, without proper guidance or preparation." Another window exploded somewhere deeper in the castle, followed by shouts of alarm from the guards. In the distance, a wolf howled in response to her unleashed energy, then another, and another, until the night was filled with voices calling to something they didn't understand but couldn't ignore. "I can't control it," Lyra said, panic creeping into her voice as she felt the power building again, looking for an outlet. "It feels like lightning trapped under my skin. Look at me." Cassius's command was gentle but absolute, and her eyes snapped to his automatically. "Breathe with me. In and out, slow and steady." She tried to follow his rhythm, but the power inside her was restless, demanding release. Every breath felt like swallowing fire, and she could see silver light beginning to flicker around her fingertips again. "I can't." "Yes, you can." His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones with surprising tenderness. "You're a silver wolf, Lyra. Your ancestors were the most powerful of our kind, the ones who stood beside the first Alpha Kings and helped shape the supernatural world. This power is your birthright." "It doesn't feel like a birthright. It feels like a curse." Something dark flickered across his expression. "I know something about those." A commotion at the end of the corridor made them both look up. Marcus was striding toward them, his face pale but composed, followed by a handful of guards whose expressions ranged from confusion to outright fear. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral, "the castle is in chaos. Half the servants think we're under attack, and the other half are convinced the world is ending." His gaze flicked to Lyra with something that might have been calculation. "Perhaps it would be best if we moved this conversation somewhere more private." Cassius rose fluidly to his feet, offering Lyra a hand up. The moment their skin touched, she felt the power settle slightly, as if his presence somehow grounded the storm raging inside her. "Agreed," Cassius said. "Have the library cleared." "And Marcus?" His voice carried a warning edge. "What happened here tonight stays between us. If word spreads about what Lyra is, she'll become a target for every ambitious pack in the 7 territories." Marcus nodded, but Lyra caught something in his expression, a flicker of something that looked almost like triumph. "Of course, Your Majesty. Her safety is our top priority." The library of Shadow Moon Castle was a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with everything from pack histories to ancient magical texts that had been old when the first Alpha Kings were crowned. It was here, surrounded by the musty scent of old paper and candle wax, that Cassius began Lyra's education in what she truly was. Silver wolves were never meant to exist alone, he explained, pulling a massive tome from one of the higher shelves with practiced ease. The book was bound in white leather that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. They were created by the moon goddess herself to serve as partners and equals to the Alpha Kings, to balance raw power with wisdom and compassion. Lyra turned the ancient pages carefully, studying illustrations of wolves whose fur seemed to be made of liquid moonlight. The text was written in the old tongue, but somehow she could understand every word, another sign of her awakening heritage. "According to this, the last silver wolf died over 300 years ago," she said, tracing one of the illustrations with a fingertip. "How is it possible that my mother—" "Your mother's line wasn't the only one to survive," Cassius said, moving to stand behind her chair. His presence was warm and solid, helping to keep the chaotic power inside her settled. They scattered, hid among common wolves, intermarried with other bloodlines. Most of the silver wolf traits were diluted over generations, but sometimes they resurface, Lyra finished, understanding flooding through her. That's why I couldn't shift. My wolf was too powerful for my human body to contain without an Alpha King to bond with. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, and she felt that now familiar jolt of connection between them. The power needs an anchor, someone strong enough to help you channel and control it. She looked up at him, acutely aware of how close he was standing, how the candlelight caught the silver now flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Is that what we have now? A bond? Something complicated passed across his expression. We have the beginning of one. But it's incomplete, unstable. That's why your power is so chaotic right now. How do we complete it? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to face. A full mating bond between alpha and mate was more than just political or magical, it was deeply, intimately personal. It would join their souls as well as their bodies, create a connection that would last until one of them died. We train first, Cassius said finally, stepping back and breaking the moment. You need to learn control before we even consider. He didn't finish the sentence, but Lyra felt the incompleteness of it like a physical ache. She was beginning to understand that this man, this king who commanded armies and inspired fear in his enemies, was terrified of one thing, loving someone enough to lose them again. The training began the next morning in a private courtyard hidden deep within the castle walls. It was a place Cassius had used for his own combat practice, surrounded by high stone walls and warded with ancient magic to contain supernatural energies. The first lesson, he said, standing across from her in the early morning sunlight, is learning to recognize the difference between your human consciousness and your wolf. Lyra nodded, trying to focus despite the way the morning light caught the strong lines of his face, the way his simple training clothes did nothing to hide the powerful build beneath. He'd removed his shirt for the lesson, claiming that physical barriers could interfere with energy work, and she was finding it increasingly difficult to concentrate on anything but the play of muscles across his chest and shoulders. Close your eyes, he instructed, moving to stand behind her. Feel for the presence inside you, the part that woke up yesterday. Don't try to control it yet, just acknowledge that it's there. She let her eyes drift shut, immediately becoming more aware of his presence behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, catch the scent that was becoming increasingly familiar, pine and storm winds and something uniquely him. I can feel her, Lyra said softly, surprised by the realization. She's restless. Curious. Good. Now I want you to try reaching out to her, the way you might reach out to touch something physical. Lyra extended her awareness inward, searching for the presence she could sense coiled in the depths of her mind. When she found it, the contact was like touching lightning. Power surged through her, wild and demanding, and she gasped as silver light began to flicker around her hands. Easy, Cassius murmured, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. The moment he touched her, the power settled slightly, no longer fighting for immediate release. Don't try to suppress it or force it into submission. Think of it like gentling a wild horse. You need to earn its trust. His voice was low and soothing, and Lyra found herself leaning back against his chest almost without realizing it. The solid warmth of him helped anchor her as she struggled to find balance between her human consciousness and the ancient power stirring to life inside her. That's it, he said, and she could feel his breath stirring her hair. You're doing beautifully. The praise sent warmth flooding through her that had nothing to do with supernatural power and everything to do with the way this man seemed to see strength in her that she'd never known existed. They worked like that for hours, with Cassius guiding her through exercises designed to help her recognize and gradually control the emerging abilities. His hands on her shoulders, her back, her arms, always steady, always supportive, but never crossing the invisible line that would take their interactions from training into something more intimate. By midday, she could call forth the silver light at will and dismiss it again without causing architectural damage. It was progress, but Lyra found herself increasingly frustrated by the careful distance Cassius maintained between them. The incomplete bond between them thrummed with tension and possibility, but every time she thought he might close that final gap, he pulled back. "I think that's enough for today," he said, stepping away as she successfully channeled power into a focused beam of silver light that left a smoking mark on the stone wall. "I can do more," she protested, turning to face him. "I feel like I'm just beginning to understand." Understanding isn't the only consideration. His expression had gone carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had clenched into fists at his sides. "You're exhausted, even if you don't realize it yet. Using that much power so soon after your awakening, it takes a toll." As if his words had summoned it, fatigue hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Cassius hadn't moved with inhuman speed to catch her against his chest. For a moment, they stayed like that, her face pressed against the warm skin of his throat, his arms wrapped around her waist, both of them breathing hard from more than just exertion. She could feel his heartbeat thundering against her cheek, could sense the war being fought behind his careful composure. "Cassius," she whispered, lifting her head to look at him. His storm-gray eyes were darker now, heavy with an emotion she was beginning to recognize. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "We should go inside. You need rest." But he made no move to release her, and she made no move to step away. The air between them seemed to thicken with possibility, and she found herself rising up on her toes, drawn by an instinct older than thought. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heartbeat she thought he might close the distance between them. Then, just as she felt his head beginning to lower toward hers, he jerked back as if she'd burned him. "No," he said sharply, his hands falling away from her so abruptly that she stumbled. "We can't. I won't do that to you." The rejection hit her like a slap, and she felt tears stinging her eyes before she could stop them. "Do what to me? Care about me? Want me? I won't make you a target." His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the pain he was trying to hide. "I won't watch another woman He stopped, shaking his head. "The bond between us is incomplete. Your feelings aren't entirely your own right now." "Don't you dare tell me what I'm feeling," Lyra snapped, anger rising to mask the hurt. "I may be new to having a wolf, but I'm not new to knowing my own heart. Your heart doesn't matter if you're dead." The words came out harsher than he'd obviously intended, and she saw him flinch at his own cruelty. "Every enemy I've ever made will see you as a weakness to exploit. Every ambitious alpha will see you as a prize to be claimed. And everyone who ever loved Isabella will see you as her replacement." "I'm not trying to replace her," Lyra said quietly. "I couldn't even if I wanted to." "No," he agreed, his voice soft with old grief. "You couldn't. Because she was perfect, and I failed to protect her, and I won't make that mistake again." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lyra alone in the training courtyard with tears on her cheeks and the incomplete bond between them pulsing with frustrated longing. The emergency summit convened that evening with all the pageantry and underlying tension of a gathering of apex predators forced to share the same territory. Pack leaders from across the 7 kingdoms had arrived within hours of sensing the power surge from Lyra's awakening, each bringing their own agenda and their own interpretation of what the disturbance meant. Lyra watched from the shadows of the gallery above the Great Hall, having been explicitly forbidden from attending the gathering. Below, she could see Cassius in his formal crown and robes of state, every inch the powerful king she'd sometimes forgotten he was during their training sessions. Lady Seraphina Nightshade commanded attention simply by existing. She was everything Lyra wasn't, tall and voluptuous, with midnight black hair that fell in perfect waves to her waist and violet eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's deepest desires. Her gown was cut to display her considerable assets, and she made sure to touch Cassius's arm whenever she spoke to him. The disturbance was felt across all 7 territories, she was saying, her voice pitched to carry just the right note of concerned authority. "My pack's shamans believe it was some sort of magical weapon, possibly unleashed by our enemies." Lord Damien Bloodmere was less subtle in his approach. A massive man with iron-gray hair and scars that spoke of countless battles, he spread ancient texts across the great table with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "These are the chronicles of the last great magical disturbance," he announced, his voice booming through the hall. 300 years ago, when the Silver Wolf bloodline was eliminated. The parallels are unmistakable. Lyra's blood ran cold as she saw him pointing to specific passages in the ancient texts. According to these records, Lord Damien continued, the only way to neutralize such power is through sacrifice. The Silver Wolf must die, and her power must be absorbed by a worthy alpha before it can corrupt the natural order. "That's enough," Cassius said sharply, but Lyra could hear the tension in his voice. "Is it?" Lady Seraphina asked, moving closer to the king with predatory grace. "Because if such a creature truly exists, if a silver wolf has awakened somewhere in our territories, then we have a responsibility to act. For the good of all our packs." "And what would you suggest?" Marcus asked from his position at Cassius's right hand. Lyra noticed that he seemed particularly interested in the conversation, leaning forward with an intensity that made her uneasy. "A mating bond," Lady Seraphina said simply, her violet eyes fixed on Cassius with unmistakable hunger. "Between the strongest available alpha and myself. The combined power would be enough to contain any magical threat, and provide stability for the kingdom." The offer hung in the air like a challenge, and Lyra found herself holding her breath as she waited for Cassius's response. She could see the political logic in Lady Seraphina's proposal. It would unite two of the most powerful packs, provide magical protection, and give him a mate with the bloodline and training to be an effective queen. Everything that Lyra, with her servant's background and chaotic new powers, was not. "I'll consider your offer," Cassius said finally, and the words hit Lyra like a physical blow. As the formal session broke up into smaller conversations, she slipped away from the gallery and made her way back to her room with tears burning her eyes and her heart breaking in her chest. The incomplete bond between them ached with his rejection, making her feel hollow and lost. She'd barely closed her door before she heard the soft scrape of footsteps in the corridor outside. Through the thin gap under her door, she could see shadows moving back and forth, more than one person, speaking in voices too low for her to make out words. Moving as quietly as possible, she pressed her ear to the door and strained to listen. "Must be tonight," someone was saying. "Marcus," she realized with growing alarm. "Tomorrow is the blood moon, and if she reaches full power." "The preparations are complete," replied another voice, female, unfamiliar, with an accent that spoke of the far northern territories. "The silver in her bloodline makes her vulnerable to corruption if we strike at the right moment." "And you're certain this will work?" Marcus asked. "I created the original curse, didn't I?" the woman replied with cold confidence. "Corrupting a silver wolf's awakening will be child's play compared to that. When we're finished, she'll kill your king herself and absorb his power. Then you can claim her as your mate and rule both kingdoms." Lyra's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over her. Marcus wasn't just a murderer, he was planning to use her as a weapon against the man she was beginning to love. "Kill her before the blood moon rises tomorrow," Marcus continued, his voice carrying easily through the thin door, "or we'll never control the Silver Wolf's power." The shadows moved away from her door, but Lyra could hear them taking positions throughout the corridor. They weren't just planning to corrupt her, they were planning to kill her if the corruption failed. Heart hammering in her chest, she looked around her room for another way out. The window was too high and too narrow, the door was watched, and she had no way to contact Cassius or anyone else who might help her. As if summoned by her desperation, she felt her wolf stir within her consciousness, alert, intelligent, and very, very angry. Not tonight, she thought grimly, silver light beginning to flicker around her fingertips. Tonight, we fight back. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 4. Under the blood moon, all debts are paid in full. The blood moon hung low and heavy in the sky like a crimson eye watching the world below, and with its rising, Lyra felt her carefully controlled powers begin to fracture. Silver light flickered around her hands without conscious thought, responding to the ancient lunar pull that sang in her silver wolf blood with increasing urgency. She pressed herself against the door of her chamber, listening to the assassins moving in the corridor beyond. 3 of them at least, maybe more, all waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her wolf paced restlessly in her mind, no longer the frightened creature that had hidden for 17 years but something wild and dangerous that wanted to fight. The soft scrape of metal against wood told her someone was working on her lock. In seconds, they would be inside. Lyra closed her eyes and reached for the power that had been growing stronger all day. Silver light erupted from her skin just as the door burst open, and the first assassin stumbled backward with a cry of surprise and pain. "She's awake," he shouted, raising his arm to shield his eyes from the blazing silver radiance that filled the room like captured starlight. Lyra didn't think, she simply reacted. Power flowed out of her in waves, and the assassin closest to her flew backward into the stone wall with bone-crushing force. The second attacker rushed her with a silver blade, but her light wrapped around him like chains, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the ceiling. It was the third assassin, a young man barely older than herself who had the misfortune to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, who made her realize what she was becoming. Her power lashed out at him without conscious direction, and she watched in horror as silver fire raced along his skin, burning him from the inside out. His scream echoed through the corridor, a sound of pure agony that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. "Stop," she cried, trying to pull the power back, but it was like trying to catch lightning with her bare hands. The young man collapsed, his skin marked with silver burns that looked exactly like the curse marks that had been killing Cassius. "I'm the monster," she thought, staring at what she'd done in numb shock. "I'm not the salvation, I'm the destruction." The sound of running feet told her more guards were coming. Lyra grabbed her cloak and fled through the window, using her newfound strength to leap distances that should have been impossible for someone her size. Behind her, she could hear shouts of alarm as the injured assassins were discovered. She'd made it halfway across the castle courtyard before the real hunt began. "Attack! The Silver Wolf has attacked Lady Seraphina." Marcus's voice boomed across the castle grounds, carrying clearly in the still night air. Lyra froze in the shadow of the stable, her blood running cold as she realized what was happening. Through the windows of the great hall, she could see Lady Seraphina collapse dramatically in Cassius's arms, her perfect gown artfully torn, silver burns marking her pale skin in places that would be visible but not permanently disfiguring. The visiting pack leaders surrounded them, their expressions ranging from shock to outright hostility. "She came to my chambers," Lady Seraphina was saying, her voice weak but carrying just enough to be heard by everyone present. Wild-eyed, consumed with jealousy. She said if she couldn't have the king, no one could. It was a perfect framed job, Lyra realized with growing despair. Marcus had anticipated her escape, had Lady Seraphina ready with silver burns that looked exactly like the ones Lyra had accidentally inflicted on the assassin. Now everyone would believe she was a jealous, unstable creature who attacked anyone she perceived as a threat to her claim on Cassius. "Find her," Lord Damien commanded, his voice carrying the authority of generations of Alpha bloodline. "The Silver Wolf is clearly corrupted. She must be contained or destroyed before she kills us all." Lyra watched Cassius through the window, saw the moment when he realized what was happening. His storm-gray eyes found hers across the courtyard, and she saw the flash of understanding, and desperate fear, in their depths. "Run," he mouthed, and she didn't need to be told twice. The hunt that followed was unlike anything in the kingdom's history. Within minutes, every guard in the castle was mobilized, joined by the visiting Alpha's personal warriors and hunting parties from 3 different packs. They spread out across the grounds like a living net, determined to capture the dangerous Silver Wolf before she could do more damage. Lyra fled toward the one place she might find sanctuary, the kitchens, where Elena ruled with the absolute authority of someone who had fed and cared for 3 generations of castle inhabitants. Elena looked up from her kneading as Lyra burst through the servants' entrance, her weathered face taking in the girl's wild appearance and the silver light still flickering around her hands. "Child," she said simply, "what have you done?" "I didn't attack Lady Seraphina," Lyra gasped, collapsing onto a flour sack near the great hearth. "It's a trap, Elena. Marcus is trying to." "I know what Marcus is trying to do," Elena interrupted, her voice hard with old anger. "The question is whether you're strong enough to stop him." Lyra stared at the elderly cook in shock. "You know? I know a lot of things, girl." I know that Marcus killed Queen Isabella because she wouldn't run away with him. I know he's been slowly poisoning the king for months, making the curse seem stronger than it actually was. And I know that Isabella, with her dying breath, blessed any woman who would love Cassius after her. The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. Isabella knew about Marcus? She discovered his treachery the day before she died. Found letters he'd been sending to the Ravenclaw pack, promises of information in exchange for support when he eventually claimed the throne. Elena's hands never stopped their steady kneading, but her voice carried 3 years of suppressed grief and rage. She came to me for advice, asked me what she should do. I told her to tell the king immediately. But she never got the chance. No. Marcus came to her chambers that night, probably hoping to convince her to keep quiet. When she refused, Elena's voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Outside, they could hear the search parties getting closer, voices calling out coordinates and positions as they systematically covered every inch of the castle grounds. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Lyra asked. "Because I'm an old woman whose word means nothing against the king's beta," Elena said simply. "But you're different. You have power, real power. You can stop him." "I can't control it," Lyra whispered, looking down at her hands where silver light still flickered unpredictably. "I hurt someone tonight, Elena. I burned him with the same kind of marks that were killing Cassius. Because your power is trying to protect you, and you don't know how to guide it properly." Elena wiped her flower-covered hands on her apron and moved to a cabinet near the back wall. "Queen Isabella left something for you." "For me?" "But she didn't even know I existed." "Didn't she?" Elena pulled out a small wooden box, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. "She knew about your bloodline, child. Knew what you were before you did." Lyra took the box with trembling hands, gasping as she felt the power contained within it, old magic, crafted with love and desperate hope by a dying queen who had seen the future in her final moments. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, and the moment Lyra's fingers touched it, Isabella's voice whispered through her consciousness like an echo across time. "For the one who will love him after I'm gone. You are not my replacement, you are his salvation. Use this to anchor your power until you're strong enough to stand without it." The pendant warmed against Lyra's palm, and immediately she felt her chaotic abilities settle into something more manageable. The silver light around her hands dimmed to a soft glow that was powerful but no longer dangerous to everyone around her. "She saw you in a vision," Elena explained quietly. "The night she died, she came to me with this pendant and told me to keep it safe for the silver-eyed girl who would save her husband's life. She said to tell you that loving him doesn't make you a thief, it makes you a guardian." Tears stung Lyra's eyes, but she didn't have time to process the gift properly. The sounds of the search were getting closer, and she could hear Marcus's voice directing the hunters toward the kitchen wing. "There's a passage," Elena said, moving to the great fireplace and pressing something hidden in the stonework. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow corridor that disappeared into darkness. "It leads to the Whispering Woods. From there, you can." The kitchen door exploded inward as Marcus burst in with a dozen armed guards. His eyes went immediately to Lyra, and she saw triumph flash across his features. "Found her," he called over his shoulder to the hunting parties behind him. "The dangerous silver wolf, hiding in the kitchens like the coward she is." "I'm not hiding," Lyra said, standing to face him with her chin raised and Isabella's pendant warm against her throat. "I'm preparing to fight back." Marcus's smile was cold and predatory. "Fight back? Child, you don't even know what you're fighting against." He gestured to the guards, who moved to surround her, but Lyra was already moving. She darted toward the hidden passage, silver light flaring around her as Marcus lunged to cut off her escape. "Stop her," he shouted, but Elena stepped between them, her elderly frame somehow managing to trip 2 guards and send a third crashing into a rack of hanging pots. "Run, child," Elena called, even as Marcus backhanded her brutally to the ground. "Find the silver wolves. They're waiting for you." Lyra plunged into the passage, Marcus's curses echoing behind her as she fled into the darkness. The tunnel was old and narrow, carved from living rock, and it sloped steadily downward as it led her away from the castle and toward the ancient forest that surrounded the Shadow Moon territories. She emerged into the Whispering Woods just as the blood moon reached its zenith, painting the world in shades of crimson and shadow. The forest was alive around her, rustling with the presence of creatures both magical and mundane who could sense the power radiating from her awakened bloodline. Behind her, she could hear the hunting parties spreading out, their torches like scattered stars in the darkness. Marcus's voice carried clearly through the still air as he coordinated the search, and she realized with growing alarm that they knew exactly where she was going. "The old oak grove," he was saying. "She'll head for the sacred places, trying to find sanctuary. Cut her off at the silver stream, and drive her toward the ancient circle. We'll trap her there." But as Lyra moved deeper into the forest, following paths that seemed to reveal themselves under her feet, she discovered that she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. The first silver wolf materialized from between the trees like a creature made of moonlight and starshine. She was beautiful and terrifying, larger than any normal wolf, with fur that literally glowed with its own inner radiance and eyes that held intelligence older than the kingdom itself. "Sister," the wolf said, and Lyra realized with shock that she could understand the creature's wordless communication. "We have been waiting." More silver wolves emerged from the shadows, a dozen, then 2 dozen, then so many that Lyra lost count. They surrounded her not as threats but as guardians, their ancient power resonating with her own in harmonious waves. "Your bloodline calls to ours," the lead wolf continued. "We are the guardians of the silver wolf heritage, the spirits of your ancestors who refused to let the bloodline die completely." "You're real," Lyra breathed, wonder overwhelming her fear for a moment. "You're actually real. As real as the power in your veins, as real as the love in your heart." The wolf's eyes, silver as starlight, fixed on hers with infinite compassion. "But the one you seek to save grows weaker with each moment. The poison in his system is stronger tonight, fed by the blood moon's power." Horror crashed over her as she understood. Marcus has been poisoning him all along. The curse wasn't getting worse, he was making it worse. And tonight, under the blood moon, he plans to finish what he started. Through the bond that connected her to Cassius, Lyra suddenly felt his pain, sharper and more desperate than ever before. He was dying, really dying this time, and he thought she was lost to him forever. "We must go to him," she said, the words coming out as both human speech and wolf thought. "Yes," the silver wolf agreed. "But know this, young sister, the witch who cast the original curse comes with the false beta. She brings dark magic that will test your newfound power to its limits." As if summoned by the wolf's words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the forest. But these weren't the horses of Marcus's hunting parties. This was something else, something that made the very air crackle with malevolent energy. Lyra turned toward the sound, her hand instinctively going to Isabella's pendant. The silver wolves arranged themselves around her in a protective circle, their hackles raised and their teeth bared at whatever approached through the crimson-stained darkness. A woman emerged from between the trees, riding a horse that seemed to be made of shadow and nightmare. She was tall and elegant, with silver-white hair that moved in a wind that touched nothing else and eyes like chips of winter ice. Power radiated from her in waves that made the forest itself recoil. Behind her rode Marcus, but he looked different now, no longer the composed beta but something wilder, more desperate. His eyes held a manic gleam that spoke of a man who had finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what he truly was. "Morgana Ravenclaw," the lead silver wolf growled, the sound carrying through the pack like a ripple of warning. The witch smiled, and the expression was colder than death. "Silver wolves. I thought we'd eliminated your kind centuries ago." "You eliminated our bodies," the wolf replied with dignity that spoke of ancient nobility. "But power like ours doesn't die, it simply waits for the right vessel to be reborn." Morgana's gaze shifted to Lyra, and she felt examined by something predatory and utterly without mercy. "So, the last silver wolf awakens just in time to watch her mate die. How poetic." "Cassius isn't going to die," Lyra said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I won't let him." "Won't you?" Morgana dismounted with fluid grace, and where her feet touched the forest floor, the grass withered and died. Even when I tell you that the curse can only be broken one way? The witch raised her hand, and images flashed through the air between them, visions of the night she'd cast the original curse, powered by her grief over Isabella's death and her desire for revenge against the man she blamed for taking her daughter away from the magical world. The curse feeds on guilt and love, Morgana continued, her voice carrying the hypnotic cadence of someone accustomed to bending others to her will. It can only be broken by the ultimate betrayal, when the one person Cassius trusts completely destroys him herself. The full horror of the trap crashed over Lyra like a physical blow. You want me to kill him? I want you to save him, Morgana corrected with mock gentleness. By absorbing his power as he dies, you can break the curse and become the most powerful supernatural being in history. You'll have the strength to unite all the packs under your rule, to reshape the world according to your will. And if I refuse? Then you both die at dawn when the blood moon sets and the curse completes its work. Morgana's smile was sharp as a blade. The choice is yours, Silver Wolf. Become a goddess, or become a corpse. Around them, the silver wolves snarled their defiance, but Lyra could sense their fear. This was magic older and more twisted than anything they'd faced in their spectral existence. As if to emphasize the impossible nature of her choice, she felt Cassius's pain spike through their incomplete bond. He was dying, she realized with growing desperation. Whatever Marcus had given him tonight was working faster than ever before, and without her there to help stabilize his condition, he had maybe an hour before the poison finished what the curse had started. The blood moon hung overhead like a crimson clock, counting down to dawn and the moment when all debts would indeed be paid in full. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 5. Power corrupts, but absolute power transforms. The crimson light of the blood moon painted the ancient forest in shades of nightmare as Morgana's words settled over them like a shroud. Around Lyra, the silver wolves pressed closer, their ethereal forms providing what comfort they could, but even their ancient power seemed diminished by the magnitude of the choice before her. You're lying, Lyra said, though her voice shook with the terrible certainty that Morgana spoke the truth. Isabella would never have wanted this. She loved Cassius. Morgana's laugh was like breaking glass, beautiful and sharp enough to draw blood. Love? Child, you understand nothing about love or the price it demands. The witch gestured, and the air between them shimmered with magic, revealing scenes from the past like reflections in dark water. Lyra watched, transfixed with horror, as she saw Isabella as a young woman, radiant with power, her hands wreathed in silver fire that made Lyra's abilities look like parlor tricks. My daughter was the most gifted witch-wolf hybrid in 3 centuries, Morgana continued, her voice soft with old pride and older grief. She could have reshaped the world, united the magical and mundane realms, become a goddess among mortals. In the vision, Isabella stood at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. On one path waited a coven of witches, their hands extended in welcome, offering unlimited power and eternal life. On the other path stood a young Cassius, storm-gray eyes filled with love and longing, offering nothing but his heart and a mortal lifetime. She chose him, Lyra whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. She gave up her magic to be with him. She gave up everything, Morgana corrected, and for a moment, raw anguish cracked through her composure. Her immortality, her power, her very nature, all thrown away for a few decades with a man who could never truly understand what she sacrificed for him. The vision shifted, showing Isabella's final moments. But this wasn't the violent murder Marcus had confessed to, this was something far more complex and heartbreaking. Isabella, already weakened by years of suppressing her magical nature, had discovered Marcus's treachery and confronted him. In the struggle, her human form, never meant to contain such compressed power, had simply burned out. She died because she'd made herself too human to survive, Morgana said, and now her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Just as you will die, Silver Wolf, unless you embrace what you truly are. Marcus shifted restlessly behind the witch, his eyes fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Enough philosophy, he snarled. The blood moon won't last forever. Make your choice, girl. But Morgana raised a hand, silencing him with casual authority that made Marcus's expression shift from impatience to unease. "Patience, pet," she murmured, not taking her eyes off Lyra. "First, let me explain exactly what choice she's making." Another gesture, and new visions filled the air, these ones showing possible futures that branched out from this moment like the limbs of a vast, twisted tree. In one future, Lyra saw herself kneeling beside Cassius's body, her hands glowing with absorbed power as his life force flowed into her. She watched her vision self rise, transformed into something magnificent and terrible, eyes blazing with silver fire, command over every supernatural creature in existence, the ability to reshape reality with a thought. The Dark Queen, they called her in this future, and she ruled with absolute power and absolute loneliness. In another future, she saw herself refusing the choice, watched as the curse consumed Cassius completely while her own unstable power tore her apart from within. Their bodies lay side by side in the forest clearing, surrounded by weeping silver wolves and a kingdom plunged into chaos without its leaders. "Those are your options," Morgana said simply. "Godhood or death. Power or love. Choose." But as Lyra stared at the visions, something nagged at her, a detail that didn't quite fit. In both futures, Marcus stood at Morgana's side, clearly her willing accomplice. Yet everything about his body language now suggested a man who was beginning to realize he'd made a terrible mistake. "You planned this," Lyra said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "All of it. Isabella's death, the curse, Marcus's betrayal, you orchestrated everything to bring us to this moment." Morgana's smile was predatory and proud. "I am a creature of patience and long-term vision, child. When my daughter chose mortality over power, I knew that someday her mate would find another love. And when that happened, I would present his new beloved with the same choice, but this time, I would ensure the outcome was different." "You manipulated me," Marcus said, and for the first time since Lyra had known him, he sounded genuinely shocked. "You said, you promised me that if I helped you, you'd give me the power to rule both kingdoms. And so I shall, pet. Through her." Morgana gestured to Lyra with casual dismissal. "Did you think I would trust a realm of such importance to a lovesick fool who killed his queen in a jealous rage? You were useful for getting me this far, Marcus, but your part in this drama is nearly finished." The betrayal hit Marcus like a physical blow, and Lyra saw his face cycle through shock, rage, and growing desperation. He'd thought he was using Morgana to achieve his goals, only to discover that she'd been using him to achieve hers. "You lying witch," he snarled, power beginning to build around him as he prepared to attack. "I won't be discarded like." Morgana flicked her wrist, and Marcus froze mid-sentence, his body locked in place by bonds of pure magical force. Only his eyes could move, and they blazed with fury and terror as he realized how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. "Much better," Morgana said, turning her attention back to Lyra. "Now then, where were we?" "Ah yes, your impossible choice." Through the incomplete bond she shared with Cassius, Lyra felt a sudden spike of pain so intense it drove her to her knees. He was dying, she realized with growing panic. Whatever poison Marcus had given him was working faster than ever, and without her stabilizing presence, he had minutes rather than hours. "I have to get to him," she thought desperately, but Morgana seemed to read her intentions. "Oh, but you can't leave now," the witch said with mock sympathy. "Not when we're so close to the climax. Besides, your king is already on his way to us." As if summoned by her words, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the forest. Cassius burst into the clearing astride his massive black stallion, and Lyra's heart clenched at the sight of him. He was barely staying upright in the saddle, his face gray with pain and exhaustion, silver veins once again crawling up his neck like deadly ivy. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her dreams, burned with desperate determination as they found hers across the clearing. "Lyra," he said, and just her name on his lips contained volumes of love and regret and fierce protectiveness. He slid from his horse and stumbled toward her, but Morgana stepped between them with fluid grace. "Your Majesty," she said, sketching a mocking curtsy. "How good of you to join us for the final act." Cassius's gaze flicked between Morgana, the frozen Marcus, and the pack of silver wolves that surrounded Lyra like guardians. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like resignation. "The witch who cursed me," he said quietly. "Isabella's mother." "Guilty as charged," Morgana replied with a smile. "Though I prefer to think of myself as a woman who learned from her daughter's mistakes." "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted, for the supernatural world to reach its full potential." Morgana gestured to Lyra with elegant fingers. "Your silver wolf has the power to reshape reality itself, but only if she's willing to claim it. All she has to do is absorb your life force, and she'll become the most powerful being in existence." Cassius was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made her heart ache. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite the pain racking his body. "Do it." "No," Lyra said immediately, struggling to her feet with the support of the nearest silver wolf. "Cassius, no. I won't." "Listen to me," he said, moving toward her with careful steps. "The curse is killing me anyway. At least this way, you'll have the power to protect the kingdom, to undo the damage Marcus has caused." "I don't care about power." The words exploded from her with enough force to make the trees around them bend away from her rage. "I care about you. I love you, you stubborn, self-sacrificing fool." Something shifted in his expression at her declaration, wonder and joy and heartbreak all tangled together. "Lyra. I love you," she repeated, stepping toward him despite Morgana's presence between them. "Not because of magic or destiny or incomplete bonds. I love you because you're a good man who's spent his entire life trying to protect people who might not even deserve it. I love you because you see strength in me that I never knew I had. And I love you because you're willing to die to keep me from becoming something monstrous." "Then prove it," Morgana said coldly. "Show him how much you love him by setting him free from his suffering." The witch raised her hand, and dark power flowed from her fingers like liquid shadow. It wrapped around Cassius, and he cried out as the curse's effects accelerated even further. The silver veins spread across his skin with visible speed, racing toward his heart with deadly purpose. "You have minutes," Morgana announced with clinical detachment. "Choose quickly, or lose the choice entirely." But as Lyra raised her hands, power building in her palms like captured starlight, movement in her peripheral vision made her hesitate. Marcus, still frozen by Morgana's spell, was struggling against his bonds with increasingly desperate energy. And his eyes were trying to tell her something. Following his gaze, Lyra looked up at the blood moon hanging overhead and realized what he was trying to communicate. The moon was already beginning to fade around the edges, the deep crimson lightening towards silver as dawn approached. But there was something else, something about the way the moonlight fell across the clearing that seemed important. Then she saw it, inscribed in the ancient stones of the forest floor, hidden beneath centuries of moss and fallen leaves but now revealed by the blood moon's light, was a ritual circle. Not just any ritual circle, but one specifically designed for the breaking of curses through sacrifice. "You planned to kill him here all along," she said, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "This isn't about giving me a choice at all. This is about ensuring that when I kill him, the ritual circle will amplify my power and bind it to your will." Morgana's composure cracked slightly, revealing something predatory and infinitely dangerous beneath the elegant facade. "Clever girl. Yes, the circle will ensure that when you absorb his power, it transforms you into something manageable. A goddess, yes, but one bound to serve the magical realm's best interests." "My interests. And if I refuse? Then the curse completes its true work." Morgana's smile was sharp as a blade. "Did you think it was only killing your king? Oh, child, the curse has been slowly draining the life force from every werewolf in the kingdom for months. When the blood moon sets, every wolf in the realm will die, unless you break the curse by completing the ritual." The revelation hit Lyra like a physical blow. Through her connection to the silver wolves, she could suddenly sense it, thousands upon thousands of wolves throughout the kingdom, all of them growing weaker as the curse fed on their collective life force. Children in their beds, warriors on the borders, entire packs slowly dying without understanding why. "You monster," Cassius said, his voice rough with rage and growing weakness. "How many innocents will you murder for your revenge?" "As many as necessary," Morgana replied without a flicker of remorse. "The magical world has been diminished for too long by those who choose love over power, sentiment over strength. It's time for that to change." Around the clearing, the silver wolves were growing more agitated, their forms flickering as they sensed the approaching dawn and the terrible choice it would bring. Lyra could feel their ancient wisdom pressing against her consciousness, offering guidance, but their message was fragmentary and urgent, something about sacrifice, about the difference between taking power and giving it, about choices that seemed impossible but weren't. Through her bond with Cassius, she felt his pain reaching critical levels. The accelerated curse was minutes from his heart now, and when it reached that vital organ, nothing would be able to save him. Time was running out, and she still had no idea how to save him without damning herself, or everyone else in the kingdom. As if sensing her desperation, Cassius reached out and took her hand, his fingers burning with fever but steady with resolve. "Whatever you choose," he said quietly, "I trust you. I believe in you. And I love you, Lyra Ashwood, Silver Wolf or Broken Omega or anything else you might be." The words broke something inside her chest, and power exploded from her skin like a star being born. But this time, instead of chaotic energy seeking release, it felt different, controlled, purposeful, waiting for her conscious direction. Isabella's pendant warmed against her throat, and suddenly she could hear the dead queen's voice whispering through the magic, "There is always a third choice, sister of my heart. But it requires the ultimate sacrifice, not of him, but of yourself." Understanding flooded through her like lightning, terrible and beautiful and absolutely certain. She knew what she had to do. With dawn approaching and the blood moon fading, Lyra raised her hand toward Cassius, not to drain his power, but to give him hers. To pour her silver wolf essence into him, breaking the curse but burning out her own supernatural nature in the process. She would save him, save the kingdom, and deny Morgana her weapon of absolute power. But as her hand began to glow with transferred energy, she realized that this choice, too, might have consequences she hadn't considered. The ritual circle beneath her feet began to glow with answering light, and Morgana's expression shifted from confidence to something approaching alarm. "What are you doing?" the witch demanded. Lyra smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like a genuine expression of joy. "I'm choosing love," she said simply. "Just like your daughter did." Then she pressed her glowing hand against Cassius's chest and began to pour her life force into him, praying to the moon goddess that she was strong enough to save them all. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 6. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in surrender. The ancient ritual circle beneath Lyra's feet pulsed with awakening power, responding to her touch against Cassius's chest like a tuning fork struck by lightning. But this wasn't the dark binding magic Morgana had intended, this was something else entirely, something that turned the witch's careful plans inside out and upside down. Instead of draining Cassius's life force to feed her own power, Lyra began pouring her silver wolf essence into him. The transfer felt like liquid fire flowing out of her soul, and she gasped as she felt her supernatural nature begin to unravel, thread by thread. "What are you doing?" Morgana demanded, her composure finally cracking completely as she realized her centuries-long plan was being subverted. "You foolish child, you'll destroy yourself." "That's the point," Lyra said through gritted teeth, her entire body trembling with the effort of giving away everything that made her special, everything that made her more than human. "You want a weapon? You've got the wrong girl." The ritual required complete vulnerability, she realized as her power began to flow into Cassius. She couldn't hold anything back, not her feelings, not her fears, not the deepest secrets of her heart. Everything had to be shared, soul to soul, if the transfer was going to work. "I was terrified of you," she thought, letting the emotion flow through their connection along with her magic. "That first day in the throne room, I thought you were going to have me executed for daring to touch you." Cassius's storm-gray eyes widened as her thoughts and feelings flooded into him, more intimate than any physical touch. Through their joined consciousness, she felt his wonder at discovering the depth of her emotions, the way she'd been secretly watching him for years, thinking herself invisible while falling slowly in love with a king who treated even the lowest servants with dignity. "I noticed you," his thoughts whispered back through the connection. 3 years ago, when you started cleaning my chambers. You were the only servant who never flinched when you saw me, never looked at me like I was a monster wearing a crown." "You're not a monster," she replied, pouring more of her essence into him as the silver veins along his neck began to fade. "You're the best man I've ever known, even when you're trying to sacrifice yourself for people who don't deserve it." The intimacy was overwhelming. Every barrier between them dissolved as their souls began to merge. She felt his guilt over Isabella's death, his bone-deep loneliness, his desperate love for a kingdom that had almost cost him everything. And he felt her years of hiding, her terror of being worthless, her overwhelming need to protect others even at the cost of her own safety. "Don't leave me," he pleaded through their bond as more of her power flowed out of her and into him. "Lyra, don't you dare leave me alone again." "I won't," she promised, though she could feel her supernatural nature burning away like morning mist. "I'll be human, but I'll still be yours." Around them, the silver wolves were howling, not in triumph, but in mourning for what she was giving up. The last silver wolf, choosing mortality over godhood, love over power, just as Isabella had done decades before. But as the ritual approached its climax, Marcus's bonds finally snapped. Morgana, distracted by the complete subversion of her plans, had let her control over the treacherous Beta slip. Marcus surged to his feet with a roar of rage, dark magic crackling around his hands as he prepared to destroy what he couldn't control. "If I can't have power," he snarled, "then no one can." But instead of attacking Lyra or Cassius directly, he did something far more cruel. With a gesture, he tore open a rift in space, and Elena, dear, brave Elena who had risked everything to help Lyra, tumbled through onto the ritual circle. The elderly cook was bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror, but alive. Marcus held a blade of pure shadow against her throat, its edge sharp enough to cut through both flesh and soul. "Choose," he said, his voice cracking with madness and desperation. "Save the king and let your precious mother figure die, or embrace the dark power and save us all." The emotional blow hit Lyra harder than any physical attack could have. Elena had been the closest thing to family she'd ever known, the one person in the castle who had shown her genuine kindness. The thought of losing her was almost enough to break Lyra's resolve completely. "Please," she whispered, her power faltering as her concentration shattered. "Please don't hurt her." "Then make the right choice," Marcus said, pressing the shadow blade closer to Elena's neck. "Become what you're meant to be, a goddess, a ruler, someone with the power to protect everyone you love." For a heartbeat, Lyra wavered. The dark path Morgana offered suddenly seemed not just tempting but necessary. With that kind of power, she could save Elena, save Cassius, save everyone. All she had to do was take what was being offered and damn her soul in the process. But then Elena's eyes met hers across the circle, and the old woman shook her head slightly, a tiny gesture of defiance that spoke volumes. "Don't you dare," her expression seemed to say. "Don't let him win." The moment of weakness passed, and Lyra's resolve crystallized into something unbreakable. She pressed her hand more firmly against Cassius's chest, pouring even more of her essence into him. "I choose love," she said clearly. "I'll always choose love." Marcus's scream of rage was cut short as Cassius did something impossible. Despite being weakened by the curse, despite the magical energies flowing through him, the Alpha King gathered his remaining strength and reversed the ritual. Instead of accepting Lyra's power, he began forcing his own life force into her. "No," he said, his voice rough but absolute in its determination. "If anyone's making the ultimate sacrifice, it's going to be me." "Cassius, stop!" Lyra cried, feeling his strength flowing into her even as she tried to give him hers. "You can't." "I can and I will," he replied, his hands covering hers where they pressed against his chest. "I've lived my life, Lyra. I've been king, I've tried to serve my people, and I failed to protect the woman I loved. But I won't fail you." The competing magical currents created a feedback loop that made the very air around them shimmer with power. They were both trying to sacrifice themselves for the other, their love literally fighting against itself in a display that left even Morgana speechless with wonder. The ancient stones of the ritual circle began to crack under the strain, sending fissures racing outward in all directions. Above them, the fading blood moon flickered like a candle in a storm, responding to the impossible magical forces being unleashed below. "This is madness," Morgana breathed, but there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before, a note of awe, of recognition, of old grief finally beginning to heal. As she watched Lyra and Cassius literally pour their souls out for each other, the witch began to remember what she had lost. Not just a daughter, but a daughter who had made the same choice: love over power, mortality over magic, vulnerability over strength. "Isabella," she whispered, and for the first time in 3 years, her voice broke with genuine sorrow rather than rage. "Oh, my daughter, what have I become?" The realization hit her like a physical blow. In her quest to punish those who had chosen love over power, she had become exactly the kind of monster she'd once fought against. She had twisted her grief into something dark and consuming, and in doing so, had betrayed everything Isabella had believed in. With tears streaming down her face, Morgana raised her hands and began unraveling her own spell. "Forgive me," she said, though whether she was addressing Lyra and Cassius or her dead daughter, no one could say. "I let my pain make me into something terrible. Let me make this right." The curse that had been slowly killing Cassius, and draining the life from every wolf in the kingdom, began to dissolve like mist before the sunrise. But breaking magic that powerful came with a price, and Morgana paid it willingly. Age spots appeared on her perfect skin, her silver hair began to gray, and the eternal youth she'd maintained through centuries of dark magic began to fail. "The spell is broken," she said, her voice already growing weaker. "The kingdom is free. But I won't see another sunrise." She collapsed to her knees, but she was smiling through her tears, the first genuine expression of peace she'd worn in decades. But even with the curse broken, Lyra and Cassius were in trouble. The competing magical energies they'd unleashed were tearing them apart from the inside, and neither was strong enough to complete the healing process alone. That's when the silver wolves began to glow. Not just the spectral pack that had been guarding Lyra, but every silver wolf that had ever lived. They materialized in the clearing like stars made flesh, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of them, their combined radiance turning night into day. At their head stood a wolf Lyra recognized from ancient tapestries and half-remembered dreams, the first silver wolf, the one who had stood beside the very first Alpha King and helped forge the supernatural world. But beside her stood another figure, smaller, more recent, but no less radiant. Isabella. Not the human queen who had died 3 years ago, but Isabella as she truly was, a witch-wolf hybrid whose power rivaled her mother's, but whose heart was pure silver instead of shadow. "Sister," Isabella's spirit said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer sunlight. "You chose as I chose, love over power, sacrifice over glory. But love this strong doesn't end in death. It transcends it." The spectral silver wolves arranged themselves around the collapsed forms of Lyra and Cassius, their combined power creating a healing circle that dwarfed anything the ancient stones could provide. Each wolf placed their essence into the magic, giving freely what Lyra had tried to sacrifice and what Cassius had attempted to surrender. "We complete what neither of you could finish alone," Isabella explained, her spirit glowing brighter as she added her own power to the mix. "Not because you failed, but because some miracles require an entire bloodline to achieve." The healing light that erupted from their joined power was visible for miles, washing over the kingdom like a silver dawn. In castle chambers and forest hideaways, wolves who had been slowly dying suddenly drew full, clean breaths. Children who had been too weak to play ran laughing into the sunrise. Warriors who had barely been able to lift their weapons felt strength flooding back into their limbs. The curse was not just broken, it was obliterated, wiped from existence as if it had never been. But in the center of the healing circle, Lyra and Cassius lay motionless as the sun rose, their bodies too exhausted by the magical ordeal to immediately respond to the silver wolf's gift. They were alive, the steady rise and fall of their chests proved that, but whether they would wake, and what they would be when they did, remained to be seen. Marcus, driven to complete madness by the failure of all his plans, saw only opportunity in their unconscious vulnerability. "If I can't rule through power," he snarled, raising Elena's shadow blade above his head, "I'll rule through fear." He lunged toward the defenseless couple, the weapon aimed at Cassius's heart, determined to kill the king even if it gained him nothing but revenge. But Elena, forgotten in the chaos of the magical ritual, had finally managed to work free of her bonds. "Not in my kitchen, you bastard," she said firmly, and drove a cast-iron poker directly into Marcus's back. The treacherous beta fell forward, the shadow blade dissolving as his concentration shattered. He landed face first in the dirt of the ritual circle, his schemes finally, permanently, at an end. Elena stood over his still form, breathing hard but victorious, the poker still clutched in her weathered hands. "Should have known better than to threaten my girl," she muttered, then hurried to kneel beside Lyra and Cassius. "Come on, children. Time to wake up. You got a kingdom to run and a wedding to plan." Around them, the silver wolves were beginning to fade as the magical working completed itself. But Isabella lingered a moment longer, her spirit form bending to place a gentle kiss on her mother's forehead. "Rest now," she whispered to the dying witch. "You chose love in the end, just as I did. That's all that matters." Morgana smiled one last time and closed her eyes, finally at peace as the sunrise washed over the clearing. In the growing light of dawn, Lyra's eyelids fluttered, and Cassius's fingers twitched against hers. They were going to wake up. They were going to live. And Marcus Steele would never threaten anyone again. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 7. From the ashes of sacrifice, legends are reborn. Elena stood guard over Lyra and Cassius's unconscious forms like a grandmother wolf protecting her cubs, the cast-iron poker still clutched in her weathered hands and Marcus's body sprawled at her feet. The treacherous beta wasn't dead, his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but the fight had finally gone out of him. "Stay down," Elena muttered, prodding Marcus with the poker when he groaned and tried to move. "You've caused enough trouble for one lifetime." But as the first rays of true dawn broke through the forest canopy, something else stirred in the ritual circle. The air shimmered with residual magic and a figure began to materialize, not threatening this time, but peaceful, radiant with the soft glow of one who had finally found rest. Isabella appeared as she had been in life, beautiful, compassionate, with eyes that held both wisdom and sorrow. But now there was something else in her expression, forgiveness, and a love that transcended death itself. She knelt beside her dying mother first, cradling Morgana's head with gentle hands that shouldn't have been able to touch anything in the physical world. "Mother," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of summer rain. "You came back to me." Morgana's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her daughter's face with wonder and overwhelming grief. "Isabella, my precious girl. Can you ever forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," Isabella replied, pressing a kiss to her mother's forehead. "You loved me so much that losing me broke your heart. I understand that kind of love now." She looked meaningfully at Cassius and Lyra, still unconscious but breathing steadily, their hands intertwined even in sleep. "They chose what I chose," Isabella continued. "Love over power, sacrifice over glory. They're going to be happy, Mother. Let that be enough." Morgana nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face as the last of her magical energy faded. "Take care of them," she whispered. "Help them be better than we were." With those final words, Morgana Ravenclaw closed her eyes and found the peace that had eluded her for 3 long years. Isabella rose and turned to Marcus, who was staring at the ghostly queen with something between terror and desperate hope. "Isabella, he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I know what you did, Marcus. I know why you did it." Her voice held sadness but not anger. "You loved me, in your way. But love without respect, without acceptance of the other person's choices, that isn't love at all. That's possession." Marcus's face crumpled with grief and shame. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. And I forgive you too." Isabella's form was already beginning to fade as the dawn light grew stronger. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You'll have to live with what you've done. With one last look at Cassius, her expression full of love and blessing, Isabella smiled. Be happy, my heart. You deserve joy. Then she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of roses and the sense of a great burden finally lifted. Lyra awakened to the sound of birdsong and Elena's gentle voice humming an old lullaby. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Then the memories rushed back, the ritual, the sacrifice, the overwhelming magical forces that had torn through her body and soul. She sat up carefully, expecting to feel hollow, diminished, fully human as she'd feared. Instead, she felt different. Not less than she'd been before, but changed in ways she didn't yet understand. Easy, child, Elena said, appearing at her side with a cup of something warm and herbal. You've been through quite an ordeal. Lyra accepted the tea gratefully, noticing that her hands still held a faint silver glow, not the chaotic power of before, but something steadier, more controlled. I should be human now, she said, confused. I gave up my silver wolf essence to save him. And he tried to give up his alpha power to save you, Elena replied with fond exasperation. The two of you nearly tore reality apart with your noble self-sacrifice. Fortunately, your ancestors had other ideas. Lyra looked around the clearing, taking in the peaceful scene. Morgana's body lay covered with a cloak, looking smaller in death than she had in life. Marcus sat slumped against a tree, bound with ordinary rope now but looking utterly defeated. And there, still unconscious but breathing easily, was Cassius. He's all right? She asked, her voice catching with emotion. More than all right. Look. Lyra moved to kneel beside the man she loved, and gasped at what she saw. The silver veins that had been killing him were gone, but in their place was something else, a faint pattern of scars that looked almost like ritual markings, beautiful rather than threatening. His face was peaceful in sleep, younger somehow, as if 3 years of guilt and pain had been lifted from his shoulders. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his chest. Silver light flowed from her fingers, but this time it was warm and healing rather than destructive. Under her touch, she could sense his life force, strong, steady, and somehow intertwined with her own in ways that went deeper than any mating bond. His eyes opened, gray as storm clouds but now flecked with silver that matched her own. When he saw her, his face lit up with such joy that it took her breath away. You're alive, he said, sitting up and pulling her into his arms with careful reverence. Thank the moon goddess, you're alive. We both are, she replied, marveling at how right it felt to be held by him, how their power seemed to complement rather than compete. Though I think we're different now. Different how? Before she could answer, Elena cleared her throat meaningfully. Perhaps we should discuss magical transformations after we deal with our prisoner? Marcus looked up at them from his position against the tree, and Lyra was shocked by the change in him. Gone was the composed, dangerous beta who had orchestrated so much pain and betrayal. In his place sat a broken man whose schemes had finally caught up with him. I suppose you'll execute me now, he said dully. Actually, Cassius said, rising to his feet and helping Lyra up beside him, that decision isn't mine alone to make anymore. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats filled the clearing. Lord Damien and Lady Seraphina rode into view, followed by the other pack leaders who had attended the emergency summit. They pulled up short at the sight of Morgana's covered body and Marcus in bonds. Your Majesty, Lord Damien said, his voice carefully neutral. We felt the curse break. The entire kingdom felt it. Our scouts reported magical lights and... His gaze fell on Lyra, taking in her silver-touched appearance and the way she stood confidently at Cassius's side. I see. The silver wolf, Lady Seraphina breathed, her expression unreadable. She's real. Her name is Lyra, Cassius said firmly, his arm moving protectively around her waist. And she's the woman who saved not just my life, but the lives of every wolf in the 7 territories. Lord Damien's eyes narrowed as he looked between them. And what of Marcus? Our beta appears to be restrained. Marcus Steele stands accused of murdering Queen Isabella, orchestrating the curse that nearly destroyed our kingdom, and conspiring with enemy forces to overthrow the crown, Cassius announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an Alpha King. The evidence is overwhelming, and he has confessed to his crimes. A murmur went through the assembled pack leaders. Some looked shocked, others seemed to be calculating how this development would affect their own political positions. If these accusations are true, Lord Damien said carefully, then the punishment should be death. No, Lyra said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the clearing. Death is too easy. Too final. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. But instead of shrinking under their scrutiny as the old Lyra might have done, she stood straighter. Marcus Steele spent his life in service to his pack, surrounded by others, secure in his position and power. The punishment should fit the crime. She looked directly at the fallen Beta. Let him live as a lone wolf, cut off from all pack bonds, unable to shift, unable to access the supernatural strength that made him dangerous. Let him live as he tried to make others live, powerless and alone. The pack leaders exchanged glances. It was a harsh sentence in many ways, worse than a clean death, and everyone present knew it. The Silver Wolf speaks wisdom, Lady Seraphina said after a long moment. I support this judgment. One by one, the other alphas voiced their agreement. Marcus would be stripped of his pack status and banished to live as a human, cut off from everything that had defined him. As the pack leaders began making arrangements for Marcus's exile, Lyra felt a strange tingling in her hands. She looked down to see silver light gathering around her fingers again, but this time it felt different, more controlled, more purposeful. What's happening? She asked Cassius quietly. I think, he said, wonder creeping into his voice, you're becoming what you were always meant to be. Over the following days, as word of the curse's breaking spread throughout the kingdom, Lyra began to understand what the ritual had truly done to her. She wasn't fully human, as she'd feared, but she wasn't the chaotic, dangerous silver wolf she'd been before either. She was something new, a bridge between human and supernatural, between ruler and subject, between power and compassion. Her abilities had evolved beyond simple magical strength. She could sense the emotional state of others, ease pain with a touch, and most remarkably, help heal rifts between arguing parties simply by being present. The visiting pack leaders, who had come expecting to find a kingdom in chaos, instead found themselves drawn into productive negotiations about trade, territory, and mutual defense. Cassius had been transformed as well. The curse's removal had lifted more than just the threat of death. It had freed him from the guilt and isolation that had defined his rule for 3 years. He was still every inch the powerful Alpha King, but now his strength was tempered with mercy, his authority balanced with genuine care for his subjects. But their greatest test came when Lord Damien and Lady Seraphina formally challenged Lyra's right to stand as Cassius's queen. With all due respect to her abilities, Lord Damien said during a formal court session, this woman was a servant until a few days ago. She has no noble bloodline, no training in statecraft, no understanding of what it means to rule. Furthermore, Lady Seraphina added, her tone coldly polite, tradition demands that an Alpha King's mate be proven through combat or formal challenge. I invoke the ancient rites and demand she face a traditional test of worthiness. A murmur went through the assembled court. The challenge was within their rights under the old laws, and refusal would undermine Lyra's position before she'd even truly claimed it. I accept, Lyra said before Cassius could object. Lyra, you don't have to, he began, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Yes, I do. Not because I need to prove anything to them, but because the kingdom needs to see that I'm not afraid to face challenges. She looked directly at Lady Seraphina. What form will this test take? Lady Seraphina smiled, and there was nothing friendly in the expression. Single combat, of course. Wolf form, as is traditional for such challenges. And if I win? Then you'll have earned your place as our queen, Lord Damien said. But if you lose? If I lose, then I'll step aside and let Cassius choose a mate more suitable to his station, Lyra finished calmly. The challenge was set for the next evening, on the sacred grounds where pack leaders had settled disputes for over 1,000 years. As word spread, wolves from across the kingdom began gathering to witness what many expected to be a very short fight. But when the moment came, when Lyra faced Lady Seraphina in the ancient circle with the full moon overhead, something unexpected happened. As the two women began to shift, Lyra's transformation was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Instead of becoming a normal wolf, she shifted into something that seemed made of liquid moonlight, larger than any natural wolf, with silver fur that literally glowed with inner radiance and eyes like captured starlight. Lady Seraphina's confident expression faltered as she realized what she was facing. Not just a silver wolf, but what silver wolves had been in the ancient days, creatures of power that stood as equals to the first Alpha Kings. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes. Lyra didn't hurt her challenger, but she demonstrated strength, speed, and magical abilities that made it clear the outcome was never in doubt. When Lady Seraphina submitted, it was with grace and genuine respect. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she said as they both shifted back to human form. "I didn't understand what you truly were." 3 weeks later, Shadow Moon Castle was decorated for a celebration unlike any in living memory. The formal mating ceremony between King Cassius and Queen Lyra had drawn representatives from supernatural communities across the known world, not just werewolves, but vampires, fae, and even a delegation of witches who wanted to witness the binding of two legendary bloodlines. The ceremony took place at midnight on the new moon, in the castle's great courtyard under a sky filled with stars. Ancient traditions were observed alongside new ones, creating a ritual that honored the past while looking toward the future. As Lyra spoke her vows, her voice carrying clearly through the assembled crowd, her power responded to the sacred nature of the moment. Silver light began to emanate from her skin, not harmful but beautiful, turning the courtyard into something that looked like it had been touched by starlight. "I, Lyra Ashwood, take you, Cassius Blackthorne, as my mate, my partner, and my equal," she said, her hand clasped in his. "I promise to stand beside you in strength and support you in weakness, to challenge you when you're wrong and celebrate you when you're right, to love you in this life and whatever comes after." When Cassius spoke his answering vows, his voice was rough with emotion. "I, Cassius Blackthorne, take you, Lyra Ashwood, as my mate, my heart, and my salvation. You saved not just my life but my soul, and I promise to spend whatever time we have showing you that your faith in me wasn't misplaced." As their lips met in the traditional mating kiss, power exploded between them, not destructive this time, but creative, binding their souls together with bonds that would last beyond death itself. The sacred grounds responded to their joining with a miracle that left the assembled guests speechless with wonder. Ancient stones that had lain dormant for centuries began to glow with soft light, and carved symbols that had been worn smooth by time became visible again, prophecies in the old tongue that spoke of the silver wolf's return and the balance she would bring to a world grown too dark. But even as the crowd celebrated, even as Lyra and Cassius lost themselves in the joy of their completed bond, a messenger was riding hard through the night towards Shadow Moon Castle. He arrived as the ceremony ended, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim with urgent news. He pushed through the celebrating crowd to reach the royal couple, falling to one knee before them. "Your Majesties," he gasped, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "I bring word from the northern territories. The forbidden lands beyond the ice barriers." Cassius's expression grew serious. "What word?" "The barriers are broken, Your Majesty. Something has been freed from the ancient prison." The messenger's voice shook with fear and awe. "Silver wolves, Your Majesty. A whole pack of them, but changed. Corrupted. They're moving south, and the scouts say they're looking for something. Someone." He looked directly at Lyra, and his next words fell into the celebration like stones into still water. "They're looking for their true queen, Your Majesty. And they say they're coming to cleanse her of the weakness that love has brought to their bloodline." In the sudden silence that followed, Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Her happy ending, it seemed, was about to be tested in ways she never could have imagined. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 8. Every ending is a beginning in disguise. The corrupted silver wolves arrived with the dawn, their forms wreathed in shadows that seemed to devour the morning light. From the castle ramparts, Lyra watched them approach across the valley, a pack of creatures that had once been magnificent but were now twisted into something that made her soul ache with recognition and revulsion. At their head rode a figure she knew she should recognize, though memory failed to place him. He was tall and lean, with silver hair that moved like liquid mercury and eyes that burned with cold fire. Power radiated from him in waves that made the very air shimmer with malevolent energy. "Kiran Shadowfang," Cassius said quietly, coming to stand beside her at the window. His hand found hers, their bond allowing him to share her strength as she faced this new threat. "The messenger brought more intelligence overnight. He claims to be your brother." Lyra's heart clenched with a pain she didn't understand. "That's impossible. I never had a brother. I was alone when the castle servants found me." "Perhaps you were meant to believe that." The voice came from behind them, and they turned to see Elena entering the chamber. The elderly cook's face was grave, marked with the weight of secrets she'd carried for too long. "Elena?" Lyra asked, sensing there was more to this story than she'd ever known. "Sit down, child. Both of you. It's time you learned the truth about your heritage." Elena settled herself heavily in one of the chairs by the fireplace, suddenly looking every one of her 70-odd years. When she spoke, her voice carried the cadence of someone recounting a story she'd hoped never to tell. "Your parents weren't common wolves, Lyra. Thomas Ashwood, the man you believed to be your father, was a good man who agreed to protect you, but he wasn't your blood. Your real father was Aldrich Shadowfang, the last alpha of the ancient Silver Wolf pack." The words hit Lyra like physical blows. "What are you talking about?" "The Silver Wolves didn't die out naturally," Elena continued. "They were corrupted from within by those who believed that power was more important than wisdom, that strength meant domination rather than protection. Your father tried to fight the corruption, but it was too strong, too deeply rooted in the pack's leadership." She gestured toward the window, where Kiran and his twisted pack waited in the valley below. "Your brother was the crown prince, heir to all that dark power. But when your parents realized what he was becoming, they made a desperate choice. They sent you away, hidden you among common wolves, and died fighting to give you a chance at a different life." Lyra's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair as the implications crashed over her. "He's really my brother? By blood, yes. But not by choice, not by the values that make family real." Elena's voice softened with compassion. "Your parents' last act was to ensure you were raised with love and humility, that you learned compassion before you learned power. What Kiran sees as weakness, your capacity for mercy, your need for connection, those were gifts your parents died to preserve." Through the window, they could see Kiran dismounting from his shadow-wreathed horse. His voice carried clearly across the valley, enhanced by the same dark magic that had corrupted his pack. "Sister," he called, the words somehow making affection sound like a curse. "I've come to take you home, to cleanse you of the human poison that has weakened our bloodline. Stand with your true family, and together we will remake this world as it was meant to be, with silver wolves ruling over all lesser beings." Lyra rose from her chair, power beginning to flicker around her hands as she prepared to face this twisted mirror of what she might have become. But Cassius caught her arm gently. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "Whatever game he's playing, whatever trap he's setting, we'll face it together." "No," Lyra said, covering his hand with hers. "This is something I have to do myself. But I need to know you trust me to do it." The old Cassius, the king who had ruled through strength and dominance, might have insisted on fighting beside her or taking the battle upon himself. But the man who had learned to love, who had discovered that true strength sometimes meant stepping back and letting others shine, simply nodded. "I trust you completely," he said. "And I'll be here, lending you my strength through our bond, no matter what happens." The confrontation took place on the same sacred grounds where Lyra and Cassius had been bonded just weeks before. The ancient stones still glowed faintly with residual magic from their mating ceremony, a reminder of love's power in the face of corruption's darkness. Kiran stood at the center of the ritual circle, no longer bothering to maintain his human form. He had shifted into something that was barely recognizable as a wolf, larger than any natural creature, with silver fur that moved like liquid shadow and eyes that burned with cold fire. The corruption had twisted him into something magnificent and terrible. "Look at what you've become," he said, his voice carrying easily across the gathering of wolves who had come to witness this final confrontation. "A queen, they call you. A ruler of lesser beings who will never understand what you truly are." Lyra walked slowly into the circle, aware of the hundreds of eyes watching her, wolves from her own kingdom and others who had come to see whether the silver wolf bloodline would be redeemed or forever lost to darkness. "I know exactly what I am," she replied, her own power beginning to manifest as silver light that was warm rather than cold, healing rather than destructive. "I'm someone who chooses love over fear, mercy over vengeance, hope over despair." Kieran's laughter was like breaking glass. Pretty words from someone who has forgotten her true nature. "Do you remember nothing of what we are, sister? We are the children of moonlight and starfire, born to rule over all other creatures. These..." He gestured dismissively at the assembled crowd. "These animals should kneel before us, not stand as our equals. They are my friends, my subjects, my family," Lyra said firmly. "And they've shown me more loyalty and love than you ever could. Then you've forgotten what family means." Kieran began to circle her, his movements predatory and hypnotic. "Let me remind you. The attack, when it came, was not physical but psychic." Kieran reached into her mind with power that felt like ice and shadow, trying to awaken the darker aspects of her silver wolf heritage. She saw flashes of what he wanted her to become, cold, distant, viewing all other creatures as inferior beings to be dominated or destroyed. But where he expected to find darkness to corrupt, he found only light. Every memory he tried to twist, her years as a servant, the loneliness of being different, the fear of being powerless, had been transformed by love into sources of strength rather than bitterness. "Impossible," he snarled, pressing harder with his psychic assault. "Every silver wolf carries the seed of dominance. I can awaken it in you." "Maybe," Lyra said, her own power rising to meet his. "But first you'd have to get past everyone who loves me." Through her bond with Cassius, she felt his strength flowing into her, not trying to control or direct her actions, but simply offering his power as a gift to be used as she saw fit. But it wasn't just Cassius. Elena's fierce protection, the loyalty of the castle staff who had seen her grow from frightened servant to confident queen, the respect of former enemies who had come to value her wisdom, all of it flowed through the connections she'd built, the bonds of chosen family that were stronger than any blood tie. The psychic battle became physical as Kieran, frustrated by his inability to corrupt her, launched himself forward with claws extended and fangs bared. But Lyra was ready for him. She met his attack not with matching violence but with something he couldn't understand, love strong enough to encompass even him. Her power wrapped around his corrupted form like silver chains, holding him motionless while she did something that shocked everyone present. She began to heal him. "What are you doing?" he gasped, struggling against bonds that were made of pure compassion. "What someone should have done for you years ago," she replied, pouring her power into the task of burning away the corruption that had twisted his soul. "I'm offering you the choice our parents died to give me, the chance to be something better than what circumstances made you." For a moment, she thought she had succeeded. The shadow flames around Kieran's form flickered and dimmed, and she caught a glimpse of the brother he might have been, proud but not cruel, strong but not tyrannical. But the corruption had had too many years to take root. Even as her healing light touched the deepest parts of his soul, Kieran made his choice. He pulled back from her offered redemption, wrapping the darkness around himself like a familiar cloak. "I am what I choose to be," he said, his voice filled with something that might have been regret. "And I choose power over weakness, dominance over submission. I will not be made soft by sentiment." With that, he broke free of her healing bonds and stepped back, his corrupted pack moving to flank him. But something had changed. The other silver wolves looked confused, uncertain, as if her attempt to heal their leader had shown them possibilities they had forgotten existed. "The offer stands for all of you," Lyra said, addressing the entire pack. "I can't force healing on anyone, but I can offer it to those who want something better than what you've become." One by one, the younger members of Kieran's pack began to step forward. They were still corrupted, still twisted by years of embracing their darker nature, but her demonstration had awakened something in them, a memory of what they might have been. Kieran watched his followers abandon him with something like pain flickering in his cold eyes. When only the most deeply corrupted remained by his side, he looked at Lyra with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've won this battle, sister. My pack is broken, my followers turned against me by your mercy." The words sounded like poison on his tongue. "But this isn't over. Corruption like mine doesn't simply disappear because you wish it otherwise." "No," Lyra agreed sadly. "It has to be chosen away, freely and willingly. The offer will always be there if you change your mind." Kieran laughed bitterly. "I won't. But perhaps it's better this way. Better that the Silver Wolf bloodline survive through you than die completely with me." With that, he turned and walked away, the handful of corrupted wolves who remained loyal to him following like shadows. At the edge of the sacred grounds, he paused and looked back one final time. "Rule well, sister. The world will need you to be stronger than I was." Then he was gone, disappearing into the northern wilderness with his remaining followers. Lyra knew she would probably never see him again, and the knowledge filled her with grief for the brother she might have had and the man he might have been. But around her, 24 silver wolves knelt in supplication, ready to be healed, ready to learn a different way of using their power. It was a beginning, not an ending, and perhaps that was enough. 6 months later. The gardens of Shadow Moon Castle had never been more beautiful. Under the careful tending of an unexpected gardener, they bloomed with flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light, healing herbs and magical plants that had thought lost to the world. Morgana moved among the flowers with quiet contentment, her appearance changed by her daughter's final blessing. She looked neither young nor old but timeless, her silver hair crowned with flowers that only grew for those who had found true peace. "The moon bloom is ready for harvest," she said as Lyra approached, gesturing to a patch of silver flowers that gleamed like captured starlight. "Perfect for the birthing teas Elena has been brewing." Lyra's hand moved instinctively to the gentle swell of her belly, where new life grew, a child conceived in love and destined to bridge the gap between all supernatural beings. "Thank you. Elena says the preparations are almost complete." "Your child will be something entirely new," Morgana said with quiet wonder. "Neither fully alpha nor purely silver wolf, but something that encompasses both while being limited by neither. A true bridge between all our peoples." From across the garden, Cassius approached with Elena at his side. The elderly cook had officially become the royal advisor, her practical wisdom and fierce loyalty making her invaluable in helping to shape policy for their transformed kingdom. "The Northern Territory sent word," Cassius said, slipping his arms around Lyra from behind and resting his hands over hers on her belly. 3 more corrupted packs have asked for healing. Word of what you did for Kieran's followers is spreading." "And the Southern diplomatic mission?" Lyra asked, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Lady Seraphina reports complete success," Elena said with satisfaction. "The vampire courts and Fey kingdoms are all interested in formal peace treaties. Apparently, the idea of a silver wolf queen who rules through compassion rather than conquest has captured their imagination." Lyra smiled, feeling the baby kick gently against her palm. Through her bond with Cassius, she could sense his joy and wonder at the new life they had created together. Their child would grow up in a world transformed by love rather than shaped by fear, surrounded by chosen family and natural magic. "Speaking of family," Cassius said, his voice filled with gentle amusement, "I believe someone is trying to get our attention." Lyra looked up to see a familiar silver glow in the air above the garden. Isabella's spirit appeared, not sad or warning this time, but radiant with joy as she looked down at the life growing within her successor. "Thank you," Isabella said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer rain. "For choosing love, for saving him, for becoming everything I hoped you could be." "Thank you," Lyra replied, "for showing me that love is the strongest magic of all." Isabella smiled, her form already beginning to fade as the afternoon sunlight grew stronger. "Raise your child with wisdom and compassion, sister of my heart. And know that you have the blessing of all who came before." As the spirit faded, Lyra felt a moment of perfect contentment. She was surrounded by love, the man whose soul was bound to hers, the woman who had raised her when her own parents couldn't, the former enemy who had become a grandmother figure, and the spirit of the woman whose sacrifice had made all of this possible. "What are you thinking about?" Cassius asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "Just, all of it. The journey that brought us here, the family we've chosen, the future we're building together." She turned in his arms to face him, marveling as she always did at the love shining in his storm-gray eyes. "A year ago, I was a broken servant who couldn't shift, and you were a cursed king dying alone. Now we're partners in every sense of the word," he finished, leaning down to capture her lips in a kiss that was gentle and profound. "Equals in power, in love, and in the responsibility we share for our people." As they kissed, silver light flickered around them, not chaotic or dangerous as it had been in the beginning, but warm and welcoming, a sign of the love that had transformed them both. From her garden, Morgana watched with a peaceful smile. From her kitchen, Elena hummed an old lullaby while preparing dinner for the extended family they had all become. And somewhere in the castle, the silver wolves who had chosen healing over corruption worked alongside common wolves to build a kingdom where strength was measured not by dominance but by the willingness to protect and nurture others. The curse that had once threatened to destroy everything had been broken not by violence or sacrifice, but by the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. And as Lyra felt her child move within her, she knew that the legacy they were building would endure long after they were gone, a world where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where power served love rather than the other way around, and where the strongest magic of all was the choice to see the best in others and help them become it. Some curses are meant to kill, but the strongest magic of all is the power to choose love over fear, mercy over vengeance, and hope over despair. In the end, it wasn't the weakest Omega who saved the Alpha King, it was the strongest love that saved them all. I know you enjoyed this video. Do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Leave a comment before leaving telling me how you feel and share this video to family and friends.